be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. I kind of want to start off more with something I've talked about a lot on this broadcast. And I think a lot of it's kind of come to fruition because we have too many people that haven't gone this route, and that's going to more of a homeschooling or really looking for some type of private school to, call for that type of a school or create that type of a school. That, whatever requirements you need to reach, it teaches you actual history, and really a lot of the basics that are now completely left out in, today's lesson plans, all the way down to, I've heard stories left and right about a lot of the new textbooks. Some are very, really racist leaning, and then others are complete opposite when it comes to, who they want to attack. I've heard ones where, basically, any Native American that died because of Europeans at all was all intentional, bringing smallpox, all that type of stuff was intentional when it came throughout trading. Well, you shouldn't have been here. Well, people did travel, they explored, not just Europeans. So it kind of completely ignores that part of it. Hopefully we're not losing our connection here. It's just, it leans so much, the Trail of Tears now being a voluntary movement. I think these are done to create that division. You'll have some areas where it completely leans one way, another one where it completely leans our way, completely leaving out facts where it should only be focused on the facts that we know, and then leave it up to people to interpret that the way they, their mind interprets it. That's how we come up with different opinions, but really what our opinions if we're not being told facts. Um, and with the youth today, it's crazier than ever. You know, what our history books when we were in school, even though they left out facts, they didn't really cover up a lot of stuff. Um, Not saying some didn't, but then I also had teachers that would bring up things that, they'll tell you, go research it, you know, see what you come up with. But there were only a couple times where I had a very ideological history teacher that it was this way because he believed it to be that way, no matter what any facts you bring up. They're irrelevant to what he believed. And, I think that only happened once or twice. But for the most part, most of them were very open. But it's really not that way from all accounts that I've heard. Really what they teach and don't teach in the public school systems, and a lot of the private ones that tend to operate exactly like the public schools, plus a religious class. There was a school in a city nearby that I've seen go across on the news where they had someone from a kid from that school going to the march. Basically, the school kind of, supported it. And it just kind of, I'm like, other than a religious class, which you could get at home, what difference is at school? And I kind of looked at it, and their books are Common Core books. They operate the same way. Hours are just like an hour difference in when they start and end. I was like, oh, why would you pay more for that? Your tax dollars can give you that. Oh, it's a status thing. Don't care about the actual education. You just rather have that status. My kid goes to a private school. It's really important that we focus on that. And there's a lot of different homeschooling things out there. One that I've told people about a lot of times is the Ron Paul curriculum that's out there. And there was a Ron Paul Liberty Report I'm going to play here. Don't let the state brainwash your kids. Homeschool with guest Tom Woods. And I want to kind of get into this. I think Ron Paul has a really good curriculum out there. There's other online freedom, liberty-oriented ones out there that you could check out. Just really look into options other than public school. Now, I understand that it's not always possible, but at least look into it. So here we go. Ron Paul Liberty Report.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today as co-host is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good morning. Good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well,
Good.
and we have a special guest today,
yeah.
and that's exciting. And our special guest is well known in our audience, and of course, he's been a good friend of ours and in the Liberty movement. And his name is Tom Woods, and he does a Tom Woods podcast every day, and he also talks about Krugman now and then on a podcast, which is interesting. Tom is best known as a historian from my viewpoint and a political commentator, And he's very prolific on writing, 12 books, and he's just a young guy. So before you know it, he'll be writing as many books as Gary North or more. But he's a New York Times bestseller, which is great. And he has a couple academic degrees from some schools. I think I've heard of them, Columbia and Harvard, pretty good. So, but the most important thing he ever did in his life was he responded to a request from me to come to Congress and testify and straighten out that Congress. And since that's all been straightened out and everything is okay, Tom, you should feel good that we have achieved so much. But, of course, we're being a little bit facetious, but welcome to the program today. We want to talk about the reason why we think homeschooling is a good idea.
I'm very glad to be here. Much happier to be talking to you than to be talking to Barney Frank.
Right. But I want the audience to know that Tom has worked with me and with Gary North in putting the program together, the Ron Paul curriculum. And Tom has done a lot of programs on this. But before we get into the details of the program and what is available to our listening audience, I want to just talk a little bit about the benefits of homeschooling. Tom, it almost seems routine for me on hearing something in the news today, whether it's academic problems in the government schools, whether it's the violence in the government schools, whether it's cultural Marxism. I keep saying, why are people still going to these schools, and why are they not, responding to more homeschooling and private schooling? You want to address that just for a minute or two?
Well, sure. I mean, the advantages are many, and what we're seeing these days is a reminder that passing on your worldview, or at least not having your worldview ridiculed or ignored, is a major factor. I mean, let's face it. The fact is, children are going to be influenced by people and institutions they spend all day with. And if they spend all day in an institution that basically can't stand the sight of you, then we shouldn't be surprised if the kids come to not frankly understand how the world works. And I don't mean to say that the object of homeschooling is to propagandize kids, but I do mean to say that that is the object of the public schools. It's clearly to propagandize them. It's clearly to indoctrinate them with a very benign view of the state and to make them suspicious of the private sector, suspicious even of themselves, without the wise custodianship of their paternal overlords. This is not a good thing. And not to mention, I have had many experiences with these institutions. A lot of them are just like prisons, for heaven's sake. The kids hate them. They're bullied all day long, despite the zero tolerance policy the schools pretend to have toward bullying. They don't follow through with any of that. The kids are the decent kids are terrorized half the time. And the ones who genuinely want to learn are they have to do group projects half the time, which is the biggest disaster in the history of the world. The smart kid has to do all the work, or the loudmouthy kid winds up dominating the project and doing a rotten job, and they all get a bad grade. The whole thing is awful. Whereas with homeschooling, you can adapt a curriculum to your own pace. If the child needs extra time with something, you spend extra time. If they don't need extra time, you spend less time. You're able to accomplish the same amount in much less time because you're not dealing with all the bureaucracy and all the bad behavior problems and all that you deal with in traditional school. But I think the reason what you're getting at is why don't more people do this is I think self-doubt. They don't think they can do it. And secondly, they feel like financially it's very difficult to make it work. And I don't want to trivialize that second one. But in terms of can they do it, well, the beauty of the Ron Paul program is that they don't really have to do it, that we've already done the hard work. They don't have to come up with lesson plans or stuff like that. The idea is it's all self-taught. It's video-based, and there are Q&A forums, and the parents can have if I may put it this way, a fairly laissez-faire approach.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, do you have a question for Tom or a comment?
Well, I do, and I just want to kind of bring it back to current events because I think there's no better time than today to talk about homeschooling, to talk about not letting your kids be propagandized. And we've seen this march over the weekend. Supposedly, spontaneously, 1 million kids got together and money fell from the skies to get them all bused to Washington, D.C., saying, please take our guns away. And you saw protests through the schools where the teachers actually told the kids, you better get out there and protest against guns. You're going to get in trouble. So if there's any more time, even if you're opposed to guns, to not let the system brainwash your kids, I think this is it, right now, Tom. And I know you've been watching the events over the past few days.
Well, sure. In fact, I had a public school teacher on my podcast, the Tom Woods Show, over at tomwoods.com, and we had to alter his voice and change his name and not disclose where he's from. But he came on to say, according to the laws practically everywhere you can think of, these marches that are obviously being endorsed by the teachers, let's not be ridiculous, are illegal because they amount to political and partisan behavior during school hours, which teachers are prohibited from engaging in. Now, of course, we laugh at that because half their curriculum is political posturing of one form or another, but it's not supposed to be this open and transparent, that they're just transparently being partisan and taking a position. But that's certainly what they're doing. And, of course, the impression that the kids are left with is that this really is the only position, the gun control position, is the only position we even need to acknowledge, because the only other way anybody could think is if they're in the pay of the NRA or something. There is no other reasonable position. And the purpose of that is, of course, to terrorize the other kids into silence. If kids have a different point of view, they are being treated as outcasts. They're bizarre, they're weird, they're dangerous. And to have that kind of chilling effect on a good chunk of the student population is certainly not what a lot of people think they're paying taxes for, to put it mildly.
Right. Tom, I don't want to trivialize the whole issue of the violence in the school, and people die and they get killed and there are guns and there are accidents. But I think it is very, very small compared to the bigger problem, which is the lousy education. You describe it as a prison, which many others have. The whole idea that the cultural Marxists take advantage of some types of violence, and also the chaos. The more chaos they can create, the control of the teacher organizations, and all these things that you've already mentioned. But I've been thinking about this, and if you look at the nearly 100,000 schools in this country and the many hundreds of thousands of man-hours, and these students are going to school, when you talk about real violence, you're talking about a minuscule amount. People say, "Oh, he doesn't care about it." No, I do, because it's actually used. I think the ability to use the gun issue is way out of proportion to the issue of the bad schools. They're not addressing the reasons the schools are bad. They blame it all on the guns. And I was just wondering what percentage of people go to school every single day and all the problems are there and they're not dealing with the problems. And yet if there's one big problem today or next week out of these many, many opportunities, all of a sudden it gets all this attention. Once again, it is, I don't know whether you can use the word conspiracy, but it's conspiratorial how this can do it. But I think there has to be a lot of money to make those organizations and bring those people together. So that is it. And it isn't because there are too many guns in schools, and it isn't the gun, obviously. But I was just wondering if you'd comment on that as analysis.
Well, yes, sure. I mean, that you would think that it would be a scandal what a bad education they get, and that's what the students would be protesting about every single day. Just think of it this way. If the private sector had done such a bad job at educating Americans that most of them can't pass basic tests with asking about basic knowledge of science, basic knowledge of math, or of certainly foreign languages. Basically, nobody masters a foreign language in a school setting. So we have that. Basic questions about American politics and government, basic things they don't know the answer to. Now, the way I like to put it is if Walmart were running the schools and we had results like this, we'd never hear the end of it. The private sector does a terrible job, and we need the public sector to step in. But when the public sector is in charge of it, do we ever hear an outcry? All we ever hear is we need more money, more money, more money. And so now it's what, $10,000 a student per year, $15,000. What more do you need? With a chalkboard and chalk, I guarantee you, I could do a better job than these people are doing. So that's the real scandal, is they are putting out and you know what? I don't even want to say that, because there's an equally big scandal, which is how woefully unprepared kids are. They've been in school, K through 12 is 13 years. They've been in there for 13 years. They get out of that institution. They have no idea how to make their way in the world. They don't know how to balance a budget. They don't know how to open a bank account. They don't know how to find what their niche is in the world. They don't know how to start a blog or a YouTube channel or a Shopify store. In other words, they don't know how to acclimate themselves to the world of 2018. They know how to live in 1957, where you graduate from high school and you either go to college or sit by the phone and wait for a job offer to come in. But they don't know how to promote themselves with the greatest tools in the history of mankind available to market yourself, build an audience, build an income. They don't know how to do it. They have no idea. They have been totally unprepared. After 13 years in that institution, what they certainly do know is what words they're allowed to say and what opinions they're allowed to hold. Oh, they got that message loud and clear. But how to actually support themselves. And that, again, if I may promote the Ron Paul curriculum, one of the benefits of that is that we do teach them how to start a small business, how to get a presence online, which is the greatest marketer's dream in the history of the world, how to write effective advertising copy, which is a skill that if you have, you will never be poor. We teach that, and we also teach learning how to be financially responsible to teenagers. We teach them personal finance. Who is getting that kind of background in a public school? The answer is nobody.
Well, Tom, I have to say it's not theoretical for me, because we've always homeschooled our kids. We have one that's about to graduate from high school and get his 2-year college degree in the same week. So that works out well. You have a lot of flexibility. We have 2 younger girls who are also doing homeschool. And we use the Ron Paul curriculum, so I have to have full disclosure here. But I have to say, that the idea that it's a monolith, that homeschooling is a monolith, you have to do this, you have to do it just like school, but do it at home. That's the beauty of it, really, that we have found, at least. There's no one-size-fits-all. You can use a little bit of Ron Paul curriculum. You can use a lot of Ron Paul curriculum. You can use other things. It's all about, for us at least, it's been all about letting the student, letting the child get to where they need to get. But very importantly, and this is critical for parents who care about the development, the intellectual development of their children, it is about history. And my son did Tom Woods for history, and he got a good background in real history, not funny history. And it was kind of funny, because then when he went on to the community college and he got some courses that had a little bit of the leftish, a little bit of the spin on it, he said, no, I know that's not right. I learned this from Tom Woods. I know what these guys are doing with this. I know where they're going. That's what you want for your kids to have. My 2 cents.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what I was able to do in these courses was distill what it took me 25 years to learn and put that into 1 or 2 semesters. And, because you have to read an awful lot of books. I didn't have an eyeglass prescription until I went off to grad school and started reading and reading and reading. So I've read them. I know the good books, the bad books, the reliable historians, the unreliable historians. I've done all that. Why would you want to duplicate that effort? I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. I've already done it for you. So then I went and I recorded hundreds of videos. The idea is you just watch a little video every day. 5 days a week you watch a video. You learn a little something. And I've made it so that the audio is downloadable. So the parents, maybe on your commute, you might want to know, what is my student learning today about history? And I've made it so that adults won't feel talked down to. I want it to be at a level that high school kids can get, because I do the high school courses. But I want it to also be something where the parent could listen in and say, hey, you know what, this isn't half bad. And maybe you have some good dinner time discussions. But you're right, Daniel, that one of the beauties of homeschooling is that you don't have to follow some Prussian model where your kids are sitting in little desks and at the bells that go off at certain times, and they're, whatever, they're in a line with a tray to get some milk and whatever. You don't have to do any of that. I mean, maybe today you watch a documentary instead of, reading in a dull textbook, which, by the way, the Ron Paul curriculum doesn't use textbooks because they're the worst way to convey information ever invented by man. But another day you go to a museum, another day you do this or that. Just today, just before I started talking to you, I've already I had one of my kids come up and we do math. I just do math with her because I love math. I'm a geek. I miss doing math. I was the captain of the math team. I miss it. And she's so quick that I don't want her to be bogged down in a class setting. I want to be able to just move. I say, oh, look, I'm going to teach you this concept. She gets it instantly. So why should we do 500 problems on it? We do 10 problems. She aces them. She does them in 5 seconds. why would I want to structure it the same way I would structure it for somebody who struggles in math? The beauty is the flexibility.
Well, I want our viewers to realize, Tom, that you and Gary North came to me, in 2013, just after I had left the Congress, with this proposal, and you've been there since the beginning, and you have done a lot of work on this, along with Gary, and making this available. It was very slow starting, but eventually, the program is essentially filled, and I'm delighted with it, and I get so many letters back of the people that are pleased with it. But I think that people should realize that there are these tremendous benefits from this. But you, of course, deserve a lot of credit for this. And you even put a little extra website out to make it easier for people to get to the Ron Paul curriculum. And that's the RonPaulHomeschooling.com, which is essentially your little link to our program. And I think that what you have done has been just fantastic. And, of course, we want to continue to do this, and we want to continue our efforts to build our program because, if you don't have the students, you don't have a school, and we're doing well. But believe me, the country could be better off if we have this. My oldest son, Ronnie, told me one time, because he looks at all the things that I've done, and he came up, he says, Dad, he says, I think your homeschooling program is the most important thing you're doing because of the future. And Tom, I want to thank you for participating in this and doing such a great job with the program.
Well, I appreciate that, Dr. Paul. And the site that I set up is called ronpaulhomeschool.com. And if you go there, you get a quick intro to the program. I give you an overview of it. And I throw in a lot of bonuses, too, to make it almost irresistible. I have a whole bunch of free things I give you at ronpaulhomeschool.com. But I honestly think it's the most important thing I've done. And I've been around this thing a long time, and I've done books and speeches and podcasts and this and that. But what could be more important than making what turned out to be hundreds of videos on government and history, a lot of times on topics that are just not going to be covered, or they're going to be mangled, or our point of view won't even get a hearing. Whereas if you take one of our courses, you'll know what the standard view is, but you'll also know what our view is. Whereas in the public school, you only know one side of the story. We give them both sides of the story. And I've been really glad to be part of this. And I can't tell you how honored I was to be part of it. And because I think that's my legacy, because who knows how long people could be benefiting from this. And I feel like this way, this knowledge is not just languishing in my head. What good does it do the world? It's just languishing there. I want to spread this so that we have many, many, many people who have learned good, solid history and government and economics, because what does the world need more than that?
Right. Daniel has another question before we close.
I would just finish with a little anecdote. At the time we started with the Ron Paul homeschool, my son was about 13 or 14. My girls were, 6 and 9, 7 and 10, something like this. And when we'd go on a long drive, you'd have a 6, 7, 8-year-old saying, put on the Tom Woods history lecture. The little kids were enraptured. They enjoyed it. So it really is, it's an enjoyable thing. It's an enjoyable way to learn history.
Tom, I want to thank you very much for being with us today, and I appreciate all the hard work you've done for homeschooling, and I'm sure you'll continue these efforts.
Thank you very much for having me. Always a pleasure to talk to both you gentlemen.
Very good, and I want to thank our viewers for tuning in today for a subject I consider very important. Please come back soon to the Liberty Report.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube while it lasts. Now, when you look at all these kids marching, now you might see the common faces that get up on stage, tend to spew the same exact lines that they did on TV. But when you tend to get away from that little group to explain what they really oppose and why they're marching, it's very vague. And really, there's a whole network behind the ability for this whole thing to take place. Believe me, to get something that big organized wasn't done by no kids. There's no way. That takes a lot of money and a lot of effort. And those kids were nothing but puppets on a stage. Now, if more people homeschooled or more private schools started popping up, and I really think the more private schools that did pop up and that would actually offer a more truthful education, a more fruitful education, I think it would lower costs. And it could prove the need to the public that public schools should be phased out. That the federal education administration should be basically phased out. And I brought this up before, and I remember bringing it up before around someone that they kind of looked at the heritage of their school. And I can relate. I can go, yeah, you know, you can look at generations that went to a school and, you know, oh, your dad was on the, you know, star quarterback on the football team. Your grandpa met your grandma there in that parking lot. But let's look at the heritage of public school in general. It basically was set out to standardize education to push what the government felt was acceptable. Now, maybe for groups that felt they were getting extremely poor education, that was a good thing. But the problem with that is, were they actually receiving poor education? Well, a lot of generations have passed since then, and we can look at the level of education they get now, time they get out of high school, and you can actually see a decline. When they quit school in 8th grade, it's almost equivalent to what our kids are graduating high school with. Universities used to actually be there for people that were extremely intelligent, that they could go beyond what maybe the average, or, you know, people that had the ability to learn more. Now, problems with that is, well, money. But that didn't always equal success like it doesn't today, nor did not having that stop people like today. You know, technology might have changed, but really, we can see the similarities in history. Just because you went to a university and your family was uber rich and you went to some prestigious university back in the day didn't mean you were going to be successful, nor does it today. Not having a degree does not mean you will not be successful as it is today. That's part of the brainwashing that has gone on. Because when you actually look at the facts, you just have a lot of young adults going into debt, not able to repay that. And being a person in charge of many others, I constantly see them struggle to pay their regular bills and make that student loan payment. Constantly having to, basically ask for a deferment multiple times when they're able to. Most of the time, the only time they have money to do anything with it is if they have a bonus. People are like, well, yeah, you go to school, Well, these people went to school, graduated. Not all of them, but some of them. Which, again, doesn't mean anything. But the thing is they've been paying on it for 10 years. Some of them have been paying on for 10 years, maybe on and off, because of deferments, because you have to understand jobs are now just coming back. They've been on the incline, but we went quite a while without a lot of jobs out there. And again, like I said, I work in an industry outside of this that also deals with a lot of industries that help me to take the temperature of the actual economy. And now, I'm starting in the past, probably good, I'd say maybe 7 months, I've seen a real good trend. Maybe more like 8 months. But I've seen a real good trend. And I hope to see it grow, but it's still not a high trend. It's not maybe as good as it looks at the moment, but it's definitely a positive. Trying to get this up here. Sorry, guys. Rushing to try to get this up here. Okay. Now, I'm going to play this clip here. If it works. Let me relaunch this real quick. Okay, here it goes. This one is with Tommy Robinson and Stefan Molyneux. And this is talking about what they're calling a crisis in the UK. And it really is down to something I brought up. And this doesn't mean I agree with any certain person. A lot of people that have went out there, I might even believe that some of them might be a little racist, and I don't agree with what they're saying, but I do believe people's right to free speech, as long as they're not inciting violence. But what happens when they are calling for the right to self-defense and the right to free speech? Many may know that the UK basically has banned firearms. So therefore, a lot of these people feel unsafe, definitely when they have people using vehicles and sneaking in weapons. So what's the UK really focused on? Well, they kind of get into what the UK is focused on and what the struggle is right now in the UK. And I've warned about this in previous broadcasts, because you're talking about the UK, and where you look at our media that is extreme left leaning, when you look at the Democrats, extreme left leaning, what do they do when it comes to the UK? They don't show this, but they constantly talk about the prince and the queen. Again, I've talked about this on recent broadcasts, but it's still one of those deals that it's just not being reported. And sometimes when the reports do come out in alternative media, it's only coming from maybe a alt-right type group. But what about the facts of the situation, that we know there are no-go zones, that Sharia law is being practiced, women are being abused, the Europeans there are being abused, and what's the reaction? And I think this is what helped spur the Brexit. they're claiming it's that group, analytic group in Facebook, but really, if you think that's the only reason, I think you're mistaken. But let's go ahead and get into Stefan Molyneux.
Hi, everybody. Here with Tommy Robinson, who I believe is up past his bedtime. He is an independent journalist, the founder and ex-leader of the English Defence League, or EDL, the author of the best-selling books and highly recommended Enemy of the State and Muhammad's Quran, and he recently took a stand among a forest of cell phones for free speech by delivering Martin Sellner's speech at Speaker's Corner in London, England. The website is tommyrobinson.online, twitter.com/T Robinson New Era. Tommy, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Thanks, Stephen.
Seems like a pivotal moment, not just in British history, but in Western history. It feels at the moment like here's where we take a stand or we lose everything. And the undertow to try and have us lose everything seems to be very strong, and it is through the force of will that we can hold on to everything that we've inherited from the past. Is that my interpretation? It seems out of line with you, or does it feel like everything's kind of coming together at the moment?
I think that the actions of the Home Office, the British Home Office over the last week, have definitely built up to that moment. I think that people in this country realised very quickly when we saw Brittany Pettibone, Martin Sellner, then Lauren Southern, and even looked back on the morning of the demonstration, when we saw innocent people, when we look in our country and we know who's coming into our country, we see it every day. We see cases, whether it be the Parsons Green bomb attack this year, refugees, all these people who are coming in who are known for extremism. We literally have people. We have 1,000 jihadi brides on their way back to this country. We see all of these things, and then we see who our government was making the stand against, who they were quick to hold, detain, and not just prevent coming into our country, but the actions to Martin Sellner and Brittany Pettibone, to punish them for 3 days in a detention centre, to put their lives in danger. These acts it made the British public come very aware. And I don't think I was really aware the feeling until I got to Speaker's Corner. And then the history of Speaker's Corner and all of it built up for that moment. And I wasn't sure what to expect myself. I wasn't really sure what to expect. And yeah, then even taken up in the moment of it all to understand how big it was or what was happening until I could get back afterwards. It's like whenever I give a speech, whenever I do an interview, until I watch it back to really work out and look at from all sides how it played out. It's only then that I realised what a success the day was, what a stand it was, and also the feeling amongst the British people that everyone feels that it wasn't just about this week. People have felt for years that our rights, our freedoms, our ability to talk, our ability to criticise, with all the new hate speech laws, everyone feels gagged. Everyone feels silenced. And this was a moment where everyone was coming out and saying enough is enough and no more. We will speak. We will criticise. And Speaker's Corner would be the pivotal point for that.
Well, what happened with Lauren and Martin and Brittany was truly astounding to me in how much it illuminated who's welcome and who's not welcome in the country, because you've got returning jihadis taking up residence and being well funded by the UK government. You have radicals and extremists of every kind pouring in. Nothing is done to stop them. And here you have peaceful people who wish to share a message of freedom and tradition and responsibility and European glory, and they're not allowed in. So they can have closed borders, just not to people from the European, but only to people from the European tradition. And I think that was kind of a really incandescent light bulb in people's minds, just to wake them up to where things stand. You can have open borders if you're an extremist, but if you're not an extremist, you can't come in. And that, to me, was a powerful moment.
Huge, because you are right. When you look at even one of the terrorist attacks, the London Bridge attack last year, that man had tried to join ISIS. He was an Italian. He was of Moroccan descent living in Italy. He tried to go and fight for ISIS. He was stopped. Italy then made all European countries aware of who he was. He then flies into our country unchallenged, unstopped. It's not like there's one example of this. There's literally hundreds, if not thousands of examples over the last few years of Muslim radicals and extremists who have not been prevented and not been stopped. We've got one man touring British mosques now who's actually banned from preaching in Pakistan. He's that extreme, and he's touring our mosques. So yes, it was a light bulb moment for many people to see. Whoa, look who they're stopping, and look how secure they can be, and how quick they can be to not allow certain people in. And the reality for everyone is, and everyone realises that we have this privileged minority in our country, a special minority, who can't be criticised, who cannot be upset. That's all this was about. That's all this was about, was the fact that if Brittany or Martin Selner come in, it could upset the Islamic community. That's it. And when you see that we have certain politicians in Scotland as well, I'm in Scotland now, we have certain politicians in Scotland, we have certain campaigns, massive campaigns in this country, to bring back some of the young girls that they say were groomed, they say. Some of the girls that went out to fight for ISIS, some of the young British Muslim girls who went to join ISIS. There's campaigns to have them brought back, massive campaigns. People all openly supporting it. And when these three people were stopped, or 4 people were stopped, really it's only been, I haven't seen not one single MP speak up. Not one. Speak up and speak out for the people who felt that they should have been allowed it. And I think that it shows a worrying start. This is what they're going to do now. Because anyone in this country has seen what they've done to try to do to silence me. If they're going to do this now, and now they're going to detain journalists who they disagree with their views, then it's a scary path we're heading down as a country.
Well, it's a very certain path where it ends up. Because to me, the calculation on the part of the government is quite clear, that they're not going to get much trouble from the white Christians, but they might get trouble from the Islamic extremists. And so it is simply a matter of an amoral calculation of costs and benefits. And to me, this recognition of this basic fact means that, okay, it's the old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Who gets appeased? Well, the group that people are most frightened of. What that does is it encourages people to escalate aggression, attacks, threats, violence, and so on, because that has been clearly signaled by the state. This is how you get your way. This is how you get us to bend to your will. And that lesson is not going to be, it's not just going to be confined to one group over time.
To be honest, our government done the same with the IRA. So our government showed that certain actions work. They've allowed people to see that. And it's the same with the Islamic community. It's the same. Their terrorism does work. Our government are coward, and they're afraid, and they bend to everything and anything that they demand. And people have seen that this week. And that's one good thing. I know Martin Selner said that. This has completely exposed your government. And what gets me, Stefan, is that they don't care. They don't care. It's like when the police would make a decision against me, and I think, what, you're actually going to do this, and everyone's going to see you do it. And you don't care that everyone can blatantly see the persecution you're doing. They have not cared at all making these decisions. Even though the whole world, look, as far from Canada to America, have watched on Britain this week and felt ashamed and disgusted and alarmed at the levels they're going to prevent people coming in who talk about Islam. Not a single care. Not a single care. There's not one bit of worry from the government, so long as the Muslim community are not going to want to blow things up and attack people. But that doesn't change, because they still do. They still will, and it just delays their process.
Well, and delay, of course, as we know from demographics, might be the entire end game as far as things go at the moment. And this strikes me as well. You know, the America and Great Britain, of course, have the special relationship, defeated fascists and totalitarians in 2 world wars. And now, of course, if Donald Trump wants to try and get into London, he's going to have significant problems. But if you're a returning jihadist, we paved the way with gold, and here's some free housing and healthcare. And that is truly an astonishing thing to see, based upon at least how I grew up, which was the recognition of this special relationship between the US and the UK.
We've just seen the King of Saudi, just last week, come into our country. As I was in London, as I looked to the right, I saw huge billboards, massive billboards with pictures of him, welcoming him everywhere across our capital city. I saw no protests, no demonstrations. This is a man, and in comparison, this is a royal family who execute people, People are murdered for leaving Islam. The oppression of women, all of these problems that these feminists and these people who scream about Donald Trump should be angry about. And complete silence from our whole government and from our country. He was completely welcomed into our nation. And you're right. And then Donald Trump still has not come to Britain yet, because and at the moment he does, I hope that the British public come out in their hundreds of thousands in support of him, because otherwise it's going to be such an embarrassing moment for this country if we allow the vocal, they're not the majority of the British public, I'd say, support and love Donald Trump. But what we see is the minority of far left and the vocal media who control everything. You would think that people hate Donald Trump in this country. That's how it would be led to believe, because of the way it's pushed. But they don't. The general public don't. And I hope that just as they come out on Speaker's Corner in a historic day, I hope that if Donald Trump does come to our country, that people line those streets in massive numbers, in massive ways.
Yeah. It is a strange turn of events. And where do you think things stand with regards to this endless series of horrors that are coming out in Telford and Rotherham and other places? Telford, of course, in particular, where you have well north of 1,000 young white girls preyed upon by this Pakistani Muslims, a tiny percentage of the population. The vast majority of these kind of pedophile gangs are targeting these white girls. I mean, what is it going to take for people to say, we really need to stop and reassess this process? I mean, how many children are going to be burnt on the altar of political correctness before people start to ask some fundamental questions about what the hell is going on in the country?
We held a demonstration there as the English Defence League in Telford over these exact issues 7 years ago. 7 years ago in that exact city. And at that time we were shouted down again. What will it take? That is the big question. But when you see, and whether you need to really humanise these stories, because I don't think people reading these stories are really putting in to the stories how big this is. For example, if you stop the average British man in the street and you asked him, are you aware that an 11-year-old girl, that an iron rod was heated up with the letter M and it was burned and scalded onto her backside because she was the property of a man called Mohammed at the age of 11 in a city called Oxford, then most people would not be aware of that. If you said, would you be aware that a young girl's tongue was taken to a table and a nail was put through it in one of the sessions where she was being groomed and raped by gangs of men? Most people would not be aware of that. If you asked, would you be aware that there was a 12-year-old girl in a room as 50 Muslim men queued outside the door, one by one, to come in the whole of that night and gang rape her? Most men would not be aware of the details of these stories. So people say, oh, Rotherham. Yes, we know girls got raped. People say Telford. I think they really need to, every British member of the British public should be fully aware of the details of what's happened to these children, because the sadistic nature, this wasn't about men pleasing their sexual desires. This was about absolutely taking those children and destroying them, and sadistically destroying them as a weapon of war. When you read into the details, this was nothing. This was not a gang rape. This was not This was actually done to destroy the children. I spoke this week to a father whose daughter was 12 years old, who has been gang raped as well in another city called Bury. They took her into the park at the age of 12. Picture this. If you've got a daughter, or anyone's got a daughter, a 12-year-old daughter, they took her, they gang raped her, then they poured a canister of petrol over her entire body while she's naked in a park to scare the living hell out of her as a child. So people really need to really look and read into the stories, and not just the stories, but then understand the lengths that the government and the police went to facilitate and accommodate all of this. Now, there's 10 people who refused a public inquiry. So there were calls for a public inquiry into Telford a number of years ago. And there's 10 people, all part of the Labour Party, all hiding and covering their own backsides, who refused a public inquiry, who went and I said, the next thing I want to do is find these 10 people. Find these 10 people, make them famous, put a camera in their face and say, these are the people that are hiding it. These are the people that still today, Stefan, when you read the crimes of what's happened to our country and our children, and you understand that not one single person in position of power, not one police officer, not one council worker, social worker, not one person who allowed and facilitated all of this to happen. Not one of them has been brought to justice. No one has faced criminal charges. They're all, even the people who resigned have resigned with full pensions. The message has not been sent out at all, because every single police officer, I think there's 43 police officers that were investigated in just Rotherham. Every police officer, every council worker, all of them that knew this was happening must be imprisoned, must lose pensions, all of them, to send a message out that what they've done is wrong, so that other councils where we know this is still happening across our entire country, so that those countries are too scared to allow it to happen. Because I'm sorry, but when you look at the power of political correctness, when you ask how powerful is political correctness, and then you read the crimes against these children, and you think that men actually stood by and let this happen, and are still letting it happen today. From the length and breadth of Britain, when people understand this isn't Rotherham, this isn't Telford, this is every single town and city in our country is happening. Every town and city. In fact, Stefan, if you look at the Muslim population in Telford and in Rotherham, it's very low. I said at the time with Rotherham, I feel Rotherham's being used as a scapegoat town. There's only 3,500 Muslim men in Rotherham of the age it can fit. Yeah. Now you compare Rotherham to Bradford, or Rotherham to Birmingham, or Rotherham to Luton. The problems in the other cities with massive Muslim communities are probably so unthinkable or so untouchable that they've used smaller cities where there's not that many Muslims to really shine a light on. Whereas the reality is that I think they've just been used as scapegoat towns, and the reality, if people understood, is that upwards of probably a million children have been raped across this country.
Oh, and I recently did a video on this, Tommy, and I was basically asking the question, which is on a lot of people's minds, is where the hell are the parents? Where the hell are the fathers in particular? And I got stories, of course, and people said to me that they sent me stories where men tracked down their children to where they were being held in these rape houses and these pedophile houses. They call the police come along and arrest the fathers who are trying to save their children. Arrest the fathers and do nothing about the rape gangs.
That's actually in the government report. That's actually that case. You see, we spoke about these crimes since 2004 actually, but really since 2009 in a big way. And people thought we were lying. People thought we were exaggerating. People didn't believe us. When we said the police do this, the police do that, people didn't believe it. Only now in the J report from Rotherham, we find out that, yes, you're right, two fathers got together. They went to try and get their daughters back, who were in houses held by men, and they arrested the fathers. Another case, an 11-year-old girl was in a derelict home, like a derelict property, and there was 5 Muslim men in there, all raping her. The police turned up in the home, in the building. They arrested her for drunk and disorderly. They let the men go on their way. When you understand the lengths that... There was one father that I actually met who's from a city called Blackpool, up in the north of England. Blackpool actually is where 2 young girls have been murdered. The same as Telford, young girls have been murdered. One of the girls, Charlene Downs, in Blackpool, was murdered and chopped up as a kebab meat and fed as kebab meat. And the police actually had... The men got off. The men have not been brought to justice. The men were still running the same takeaway that they'd done it in. They're just horror stories that people can't understand. And in this town of Blackpool, so the father, I spoke to the father, who they took his daughter. And when they took his daughter, the boy who was raping her, the Muslim boy would be raping her, but he'd be ringing the girl's dad. So he has to listen on the phone as the man and his father, him and his dad. So the Muslim boy and his dad are raping this man's daughter, and they're phoning him, so he has to listen to her. This is the length of the sickness of it, and the way it's being done and used as a weapon against non-Muslims. If you speak to... I've spent time with a Sikh charity called Sikh Awareness Society, who have been battling this since the 1980s. It's always the same. The comments made by the men whilst they're doing it, it's religiously motivated. It's always about the girl being a kafar, a filthy infidel, all the things all the way through this. And still with the Telford case. You know, the Telford case come out in our papers last week. Not one mention of the word Muslim, not one mention of the word Islam. Still, we've had all of these cases, all of the facts, all of the things for people to research and look into, to find out that 90% of grooming convictions are Muslim men, that 20% are called Mohammed. All of the facts are there. We've only seen 222 men convicted. 222 men convicted. And 1,400 children raped in one small town. This is a massive problem. I know there's court cases going on now. Huddersfield, 29 Muslim men. Oxford, Bradford. They're all taking part right now as we speak. When these court cases, Telford hit the news, but some of them, when they come to the press, they only make the local newspapers now. And to say that, yeah, if we reverse the roles, if any other group, if the Chinese, if the Russians were in our country doing this, if any other ethnic group or religious group were causing this mayhem, this destruction, this rape, this pillaging, if any other group were doing it, then our government would be calling them out, actions would be being taken. But because it's the privileged Islamic community, because it's the one community we're not allowed to talk about, it's being left.
So here's another thought experiment for you, Tommy. Imagine if there were 1,000 white men in Saudi Arabia who were responsible for the rape of countless numbers of little Muslim girls in Saudi Arabia. How do you think the Saudi government would treat those white men?
The way they should be treated. That's the problem. They treat them the way they should be treated. When we have this one section of our country, this one community, and if you look at it's again, Stefan, if you look at the numbers and you go through Rotherham and you go through the detailed reports and you listen to the girls say how many men raped them on how many nights, and then you look at the demographic and you see that, well, there's only 3,500 Muslim men in this town. How many of them were involved? How many men it's no longer the little threshold, the little argument that it's a small minority. No, it doesn't weigh anymore. That does not weigh anymore when you've got girls saying that they were raped by 30 men in one night, and then you start looking at the ages and you've got 1,400 victims, and each victim has been raped by this many men, and then you look and see there's only 3,500 Muslim men in that community, and then we are also aware that all of the members of the community, the mosque leaders, everyone knew it's happening. We see Anne Cryer was an MP for the Dewsbury area. She went to the imams and she begged them. 2010, she begged them to help with this problem. They refused. Even now, after all these problems, we have 2,000 British mosques. Only 500 come out and took part in a scheme to talk about the grooming issues. The other 1,500 didn't. What we also see is who's getting the funding and who's getting the money to tackle this now. Muslim groups. This is where it's just, no matter what they do, no matter how much terrorism they cause, they benefit. I was talking to a Muslim lady, and bearing in mind I've worked with Sikh Awareness Society, who are a volunteer charity, who have received no government funding, who have relocated, probably upwards of 10 children have been moved out of this country. Some have been taken to Canada. So when the girls are groomed and attacked, this Sikh charity go in. They don't just help Sikh victims. They help all victims. They go in. They know they have to get the girl out of the area. They have safe houses around the country they take them to. Yeah? This is what this charity does. They work tirelessly. I've travelled the country listening to them, meeting victims with them. And then I meet I'm taking part in a debate, and I meet this Muslim woman who she says, I do grooming workshops. I said, what do you mean you do grooming workshops? Well, I work with all the taxi companies. So I spend time with the taxi drivers, making sure they're aware of the risks of grooming and what to do in this. I said, all right, so you're a Muslim woman and you run what group? And it's a Muslim group. And who funds that? The government. So the government funds you, the Muslim woman, and your Muslim group to talk about grooming. I said, how many grooming victims do you know or have you met? None. So you haven't even met a victim. But here you are as a company getting so much money plowed into you of our money again, so you can sit down and tell taxi drivers that it's not good to rape kids. Like they don't already know that. Like, and then we hear some politicians saying it's the access because it was taxi drivers because it's an easy access. No, because there's not gangs of white taxi drivers in other cities doing this. This is happening because of an ideological belief that you believe or they believe as a community that our women are filth, that the legal age for sex is once you start your period, that all of these beliefs, and the reason it's happening is because of your ideological and religious beliefs. That's why this is happening. And all they have to do to justify their actions, all they have to do is accept that we're in a house of war. Because if this is a house of war and we have house of God, all they have to do is that, and then it becomes acceptable, because as we know, Muhammad took sexual slaves across his country, and that's wherever he was, and that's exactly what we're seeing. And I'll ask anyone, are you telling me that these children in Rotherham were not taken as sexual slaves? They were taken as sexual slaves. And that's exactly what's prohibited within the Quran and by Muhammad.
And you've probably seen these reports and been horrified at them, as I have, Tommy, that you have British policemen who are openly stating in their reports that 11-year-old rape victims are somehow consenting.
I've seen it. This was Telford. I've also seen the same police force saying that religion played no matter in this. Race played no matter in this. Oh, it makes me sick. It's sickening. And then this is, don't you see that police officer there? They're the people that need to be brought to justice. He needs to be locked up indefinitely. He needs to have no pension. He needs to face the consequences for what he's allowed to happen. But none of them have. None of them have. Well, even the calls for a real public inquiry. We saw the inquiry in Rotherham, which is what all the data and all the statistics we talk about, it comes from this inquiry. Mothers in Keighley and in Bradford have been demanding and calling for the same sort of inquiry, but they've been refused. To this point so far, Telford, they've refused. What we need a public inquiry is to whether this is sanctioned within Islam, whether what these men are doing is accepted within Islam, whether the crimes they're committing are wrong within Islam. So we need to understand the link between Islam and the actions of these men, so that we don't keep calling them Asian grooming gangs, so we don't talk about even the word grooming. It's like you're grooming a dog. This is rape jihad. That's what's happening. We're seeing a rape jihad across our country of young girls. And people still, even after everything we've witnessed, people still are blind and oblivious. And whether they are blind or oblivious, but they're still not accepting the reality. 4%, Stefan, 4 or 5% of our country is Muslim. And just look at what's happened. Look at what's happening to our nation. Our population of 5%. And I ask people, what do you think it's going to be like with the demographical change? Are you not from the same? You're not looking at what's happening. What do you think it's going to be like in 15 years? I've got 3 children. What do you think it's going to be like for them? Do you have no idea what's going to happen? And that's why, yeah. And I hope that, as I said, the only role we can play is try to wake people up. And I am aware that the British public are more awake now than they've ever been, but we still have a long way to go.
Well, and this is some of the comments that I get, Tommy. I'm sure you get them too, where people say, I can't fight everything. I can't fight this problem of demographics. I can't fight mass immigration. I can't fight my own government, who's more likely to arrest me for criticizing pedophilia than arresting the pedophiles. I don't know how to fight this because there are so many forces arrayed against trying to get a change. And of course, the British people did, I think, try to get quite a change, or at least gain some control over their own borders through the Brexit process. And I'm sure you're aware, it was just found out that England is rolling over, the UK is rolling over to the EU, mass immigration, open borders, at least until 2020. People get almost permanent citizenship forever so that they're not uncertain about their legal status and so on. And this is after the British population took considerable risks personally and professionally to speak out against open borders, to try and gain some control over mass third world immigration. And Theresa May and others just rolling over. And I don't know if there's not going to be a free speech solution, if there's not going to be a political solution. I think we all know where this leads.
I think you're right. I think that we need a political option. We need a political solution. We needed, after Brexit, UKIP brought us Brexit. That's the reality. Nigel Farage brought us Brexit. We needed that political party to then tackle Islam. We needed the Conservative Party to start losing votes and the Labour Party to start losing votes to the British public on the issue of Islam in the close-knit candidacy. But we didn't see that. That's still what we need if we don't have a political solution. And to be honest, we're the only country that doesn't in Europe. Whether it be Le Pen, whether it be Wilders, whether it be the Swedish Democrats, we've seen what happened in Austria, we've just seen what happened in Italy. All these other countries, because of our first past the post system, it's very difficult in this country. So the only way we can do it is to put pressure on we can't, starting a new party, I think, is impossible. The idea, impossible to get in power. The idea should be to put pressure and take votes from the others so that they shift on where they're at, which they would, because they're such cowards and such. If they saw the swing, and there is a massive swing, and I think that Britain is primed, and I hope that, I don't know if you're aware, Jared Batten has taken leadership of UKIP. Jared Batten is completely sound on Islam. So if he grows into the leader that he could be, then and galvanises and electrifies the working class on this issue. The reality is, in this country, we have no one to vote for in Islam. We have no one. UKIP never represented against Islam. UKIP was against the European Union. They didn't speak about Islam. Under Jared Batten's leadership, they could. So I think in the next couple of months, we'll see as a country, do we have an anti-Islam political voice? And if we do, then that could be the solution. Without that, I see nothing but heated discussions and anger and frustrations taken to the streets.
Oh, it's going to boil over into violence. I mean, there's no doubt about that, and this is why I try to keep these conversational channels open, Tommy. It's why I try to get people to continue to talk about these issues in the UK, because historically, if a people are cornered and brutalized and oppressed and made to feel strangers in their own land, and if their laws get displaced and if their population gets displaced, they do not take it peacefully. And we are, I think, still in the realm of peaceful, relatively peaceful political solutions, but I think the time for that is, the clock for that is running down.
I agree. I think that this Saturday in Birmingham, Britain's second city, England's second city, I think you'll see tens of thousands of people taken to the streets under the banner of the Football Lads Alliance. This is a growing movement as well, and this is the first time that this movement would have faced opposition or been in a city that has a Muslim population. So time will tell. Time will tell what happens. But yeah, you complete up. How much more? I said it after the terrorist attacks. How much more do you think British men will take? How much more does the government think English people will take? When we're seeing our children brutalised and raped, when we're seeing theatres blown up, when we're seeing and when you don't see any light at the end of the tunnel, which is there's none of them. The government have made no stops to stop ISIS fighters. They're actually welcoming back jihadi brides. When we see all of these things, we see that no measures or lengths are being taken or put in to detain 23,000 Muslims on a watch list. But we see lengths are being made to stop and prevent journalists or people coming into our country who want to talk about that. When you see that, that's a dangerous mix. And I always say that if you pull that and you make people feel like there is no solution, then you'll create monsters. And I said this with the Darren Osborne case. I don't know what else they think's going to happen. It's like they're building it up to happen. They're allowing it to happen.
Yeah. No, it almost feels like an engineered conflict. When you see the UK law enforcement leaping into action because some guy made a joke video of a dog who looks like Hitler, and this guy gets dragged through the court system and so on. But open pedophiles where the fathers are pointing through the window saying they're in there now with my daughter's blood on their hands and nothing happens. It has become a mix of Kafka, of Dostoevsky, and of Dante's Inferno, that there is a kind of hellscape that is rising in the British landscape as far as I can see it. And those of us, like yourself in particular, of course, Tommy, who are valiantly trying to find verbal free speech informed solutions, it is almost like you're being pushed aside because they want this kind of battle. It's hard to imagine how they think it's going to occur in any other direction.
I agree. And the case you're on about with the dog, that's actually why I'm in Scotland. I don't know if you're aware that he's in court in the morning.
It's tomorrow morning, right, Count Dankula? So just help people who are not up to speed on that travesty.
So Count Dankula is a man in Scotland who made a comical video. He took his dog, his partner's dog, and he taught her dog while his partner was away. It's a dog that she loves, cute little gorgeous dog. And he taught her dog that if he says gas the Jews, it lifts its paw up. Now, at worst, people would say, and if you watch the video, I don't do any justice there, because if you watch the video, no matter who you are, it's a funny video. And it's humour. And whether at worst, people could say it's bad taste humour. But a crime? To put someone in prison? When we go through, whether it be Monty Python, or we look through comedy sketches, or we get comedians who make jokes, whether they be racist jokes or religious jokes, are you going to start imprisoning them? And this is where the level of free speech has gone. And that's why, following on from what just happened this weekend in Speaker's Corner, that's why I've come to Scotland to report on this. Because if this man goes to prison tomorrow, if he goes to prison for a joke, he clearly is not an anti-Semite. He clearly is not a Nazi. He clearly was having a wind-up and a joke with a dog and making a humorous video. And if he goes to prison tomorrow, then it's another shift. And basically what they want to do, what they want to have in our country, they want to have us being raped, they want to have terrorist attacks constantly, and they don't even want us to have the ability to talk about it. Because in the last couple of weeks, we've seen Sadiq Khan out in Texas. We've seen another Labour MP with the CEOs from YouTube. And what they've done, and this is when I can see how it's all playing out. Basically, that Darren Osborne court case, which was the man who run the truck into Muslims, at the start of that court case, in the opening of that trial, they mentioned me, Tommy Robinson, and they said I had Twitter direct messages with this man. No, I didn't. It's a complete lie. I'm actually going through court proceedings against them. But what that's done, they used that. So a Labour MP this week went to sit down with YouTube CEOs and said, why are you promoting Tommy Robinson's videos? Why are you the man who was linked with the Darren Osborne terrorist attack? Well, I wasn't linked, but they've used that false allegation to now try and silence me on YouTube. And this is where we're headed. And then you've got Sadiq Khan talking in Texas. And then I think they made a statement today saying that the wild west of the internet, the wild west of you can say whatever you want on the internet, days are gone. Now, under these hate crime, I've seen just 3 days ago, Baroness Varsi in British Parliament. She stood up, because Lord Pearson invited me into Parliament, and I'd done an interview with Lord Pearson. She stood up and said, Tommy Robinson and his hate. This new word of hate, where they're bracketing everything. That's going to be used to remove us from social media, from YouTube, from Twitter, from Facebook. So then, as all this is happening, you can't even talk about it. Even the people making slight comments are arrested. We saw after the grooming scandal in Newcastle, another city, 7 people made comments underneath, linking it to Islam. The police went all around their houses, straight around their houses. So this is where we're heading, and where they're heading is to silence, and free speech becomes the fundamental issue in it, which we realised this weekend, is that if they take our speech, if they take our ability to talk about this, if they take our rights and our freedoms away to even criticise and give our opinions on it, then we have nothing. Then they just steamroll through. We are being replaced. Martin Selner's speech said that. We are being replaced. We are. You just have to come to my hometown. Look at my hometown of Luton. By 2030, the Pakistani and Bangladeshi community will increase by 70 to 77%. The white population of that town, or the non-Muslim population of that town, will go right the way down to 15%. That's happened in my lifetime. That's happened in my lifetime. That's how quickly it can happen. That's what people who, if you're sitting in America, if you're sitting in Canada, and you've just got small numbers coming, you don't realise how like that. It's like, oh my God, what has happened here? And with the open border policies, with the influx of refugees, and there can be no mistake currently with what's happening across Europe that this is planned and orchestrated. And I'm just glad that we have some people like Viktor Orban. We have certain countries now coming together, whether it be Poland, the Czech Republic, hopefully now Italy, Austria. We have a formation within Europe who are repelling and ready to fight against what I'd say is the takeover of European land.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredible how quickly demographics can change, particularly when, of course, you tax one group and use it to fund the birth rate of another group. It's not even an organic process, so to speak. I mean, you're paying people to come in, you're giving them huge amounts of money, you're giving them free healthcare, free education, subsidized housing, and then you pay them, sometimes through welfare benefits, per child. So you're taxing one group and subsidizing another group. You're taxing one group, which means they can't have as many children, and you're subsidizing another group, which means they can have many times more children. And it can happen in 20, 30 years. That is how quickly it can happen, and that is astonishing.
29% of 15-year-olds in Britain are now from immigrant background. 29%. So when that generation gets to ours, that's a 30% level of our country that will be basically from the Islamic community. Where, as I said, look at the problems we're facing from 5%. So people need to really, if you want a safe future, if you want a prosperous future, if you want to hand down to your children what was handed down to us, people need to get up, get off their sofas and get out of their houses. Stop moaning about it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the call to action. I want to suggest, of course, check out Tommy's books, Enemy of the State and Muhammad's Quran, and also check out the website TommyRobertson.online and twitter.com/T Robertson New Era. I look forward to seeing what you've got to say about the case tomorrow. Thanks a lot for your time tonight, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Stefan. Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Stefan Molyneux on YouTube. Check him out. And that was also Tommy Robertson from the UK. And if you don't think this can happen here, then you haven't been paying attention to social media lately. Because if you've been paying attention to social media, you really understand that there's a war against free speech. Speak the truth all the way up to the point where we don't want that to be known, and that goes against our agenda. There's many theories of where it's coming from, why it's coming from, whatever group. But I really do think there is global connections. But there's also other global connections trying to fight it. But the problem is, I'm not really seeing too much of what I would expect to be a good side. Hardcore nationalism is scary on its own. Globalism under a government. Now, when you think of free flow of people as free individuals, that's one thing, but one world government type of globalism, not a good thing. They can model after America. Oh, we'll just vote someone in, but the only candidates that ever get a run are kind of like also in Russia. Here's your opposing candidates here. It's getting that globalism is getting out of control. So, where do we go from here? Is there an exit strategy? Does Trump believe in a exit strategy without going full hardcore nationalist? Yeah, love where you're from, but blindly going, well, because we love our nation so much, we'll allow you to have a national socialist type, atmosphere or whatever. So it's something where they're going to definitely hack away at free speech. The one thing they would love is to get the guns out of Americans' hands. Because they know unless they can do that, eventually, they can only push so far before people say no more. Absolutely no more. Now, we are coming towards the end of the broadcast, and I forgot that last clip was as long as it was. I was hoping that was only a 20, maybe 30 at max. I didn't realize it was almost 45 minutes. I did want to get to this We Are Change video about John Bolton claiming he is a swamp. And this is everything the media won't tell you about John Bolton. So let's go ahead and dive in this real quick here. It's a real short
Police officer
clip.
gets out.
Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here for WeAreChange.org. And we have a new national security advisor. John Bolton has replaced H.R. McMaster in this ever-turbulent Trump administration. Now, for those who still believe that Trump is, quote-unquote, draining the swamp, well, they're not familiar with John Bolton and his policies, because John Bolton is the swamp. There is no denying this. There could not be a bigger war hawk now as the head of the National Security Agency.
Si vis pacem parabellum. If you want peace, prepare for war.
There could not be a bigger proponent for domestic surveillance on all citizens than John Bolton.
There is no presumption of criminal activity when they collect metadata for everybody. I mean, that's not necessarily...
That doesn't bother me in the slightest. The reason they're collecting, and at this stage I take your question to mean just collecting, is so that it's readily available to the government.
There could not be a bigger proponent for continued war with Syria and perhaps a military strike on Iran other than John Bolton.
That's a pretty aggressive call. I haven't heard anybody say that we should right now go in and bomb those camps.
But the situation that our forces face in Iraq now is that they are being attacked. They are in danger from Iranian-led, Iranian-financed, trained, and equipped terrorists. So this is not provocative or preemptive. This is entirely responsive on our part.
And we're going to go over all that in this video, because who is John Bolton? And why should we be outraged that he's now our national security advisor? Now, John Bolton was actually a neoconservative before it was cool, before the second Bush administration was even in office. In fact, Bolton was one of the largest proponents to stop the recount all the way back in 2000. And even then, he was promoting war with Syria. This is a long, long time ago. This is who John Bolton truly is. Now, when John Bolton did get a position in the Bush administration, he was touting the Iraq war as something that was a necessity to stop weapons of mass destruction and, of course, a brutal dictator. That's how he moved into the position of the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Now, you would think, after all the failed policy in Iraq, that John Bolton would come clean and say that he thought it may have been a mistake. Not true. John Bolton is still 100% behind the Iraq war and the decision to go into that nation.
I think the decision to overthrow Saddam Hussein was essentially the correct decision, even knowing everything we know now. And those who say that we're worse off today after overthrowing Saddam Hussein don't understand the threat that he posed, don't understand the continuing threat that he would have posed to the oil assets in the region and his full intention to resume his weapons of mass destruction program.
In fact, in 2008, he escaped citizen's arrest in the United Kingdom when angry protesters called for his head all the way back 10 years ago. This is a man that was dishonest before Congress after the Iraq debacle was exposed, and he took absolutely no credit for the disinformation that was spread by his office.
Why the United States was making false claims to the United Nations. Who put this claim into the State Department fact sheet?
I have no idea. I didn't participate in the drafting of the fact sheet.
For all intents and purposes, you're saying that they weren't under your control and that this was done without your
This was
knowledge.
a staff.
Do you see the irony here? And yet, here we are on this merry-go-round about you have people under your supervision, but they're not under your control. And this is an issue of major U.S. policy.
No, the preparation of a fact sheet, Congressman, is not a major issue of U.S. policy. This was a staff-level function done.
When we're making a decision whether or not to go to war because a foreign country, because Iraq is trying to acquire nuclear weapons, that is a major issue.
Now, he has called Edward Snowden treasonous and called him to be swinging from a tree.
I mean, my view is that Snowden committed treason. He ought to be convicted of that, and then he ought to swing from a tall oak tree.
This is a person that disregards the civil liberties of all American citizens and actually endorses the collection of all of our metadata. And I promise you, folks, more than our metadata is being taken in by the National Security Agency. Bolton has also tried to de-emphasize the idea of surveillance on American citizens, saying that we are dust in the wind to the algorithms of the National Security Agency.
I think part of the problem is that when people hear about these NSA techniques, they say to themselves, well, I'm important, and, you know, I could be the subject of surveillance. I probably should be the subject of surveillance. And in fact, I probably am being surveilled, and I'm outraged by that. Let me just tell you, you, everybody in this room, we are dust in the wind for the NSA. Dirt in the road. They couldn't care less about what we do. But unless you're cavorting with terrorists, when the algorithm sweeps across your electrons, it goes right past.
Bolton is a staunch supporter of Israel and has actually encouraged them to nuke Iran. This is insanity. Bolton has been a constant war hawk in regards to China and Russia, and we can only expect that to continue under the current administration. Bolton, when put into a corner, just won't answer the question and will let you know that he needs to come up with a lawyer's response, because that's what John Bolton is at heart, another lawyer politician.
Philippe Sands, whose book Torture Team is being discussed here later, has traced the approval of such practices all the way to the very top of the American administration.
I'm not going to go any further because I don't think I've done the preparation that I would need to do to give a lawyer's answer, and I'm just not going to do it. I haven't done it. Let me just say I'm not resisting it here today alone. I have not opined on this at all, and I don't intend to until such time, if ever, when I study it to my satisfaction.
Bolton even seriously considered running for president in the last election and put together a super PAC. And if we were to believe the Trump of old, he even tweeted back in the day that nobody in the previous Bush administration should have anything to do with decisions in Syria. Yet, Trump just took him in as his national security advisor. Bolton was also a staunch supporter of the Obama drone program, saying that it was a nice progression of the Bush-era administration's policies. Bolton has also made disturbing comments about the press's role in releasing information, talking about how maybe Greenwald should not have released Snowden's documents, and asked the question why the Washington Post didn't produce them.
action? Should journalists be silent when they are given information?
Well, I think obviously the culture of journalism in this country is very different than what it was when journalists never bothered to reveal that Franklin Roosevelt spent his time in a wheelchair. And I don't expect that you can go back to that. And I also don't think that there is a privileged class called journalists. And how come Greenwald keeps putting it out, but the Post isn't putting it out anymore?
And let us not forget that all the way back in 2007, John Bolton was calling for action against Syria, even trying to implicate that they had a nuclear weapons deal or program burgeoning with North Korea. This is the type of thing that this man has been promoting now for well over a decade.
That this really was a nuclear facility and that North Korea was involved. So this has very serious implications for the six-party talks in North Korea, for the Middle East peace process, and even for Iran's nuclear program, given the Iranian influence over Syria.
Now, many people, including myself, thought that Rand Paul was obviously the best choice for the presidential nomination under the Republican Party. And let me tell you, Rand Paul was very vocal towards the end of last year when Bolton was actually being considered for the Secretary of State position. Well, anybody that knows Rand Paul knew that he would be a hard no for many reasons.
So, but I do know that John Bolton doesn't get it. He still believes in regime change. He's still a big cheerleader for the Iraq War. He's promoted a nuclear attack by Israel on Iran. He wants to do regime change in Iran. So I think John Bolton is so far out of it and has such a naive understanding of the world. If he were to be the assistant or the undersecretary for Tillerson, I'm an automatic no on Bolton. He should get nowhere close to the State Department if anybody with a sane worldview is in charge.
Now, for all of these reasons and many, many, many more, John Bolton has no business as our national security advisor and in any administration. That is the bottom line, and we have to stop apologizing for these appalling decisions by the Trump administration and look at what's really going on. The swamp is here to stay, folks, and I don't see it going anywhere. As always, folks, if you enjoyed this video, please share it on social media, hit that like button, follow me on Twitter at Jason Burmis, and folks, it's only through your financial support that reports like this one are possible. So if you can go to wearechange.org and make that donation, I can't tell you how much it helps us out. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you soon.
We are change. Sorry. We are change. We are change.org, and we are change on YouTube again, as long as it's there on YouTube. We don't know how long that'll last. Now, John Bolton. If we followed what John Bolton wanted, I think you would see an attempt on regime change, definitely in Syria. Continuing Syria would be a big deal for John Bolton. And another deal would be Iran. I really think that he would push for that. Now, let's go ahead and displace more people from the Middle East in areas that have already been radicalized in certain spots. Let's intervene so we take some of them that weren't radicalized, then, anger them a little bit, so then they become radicalized. Now that you did that, now we'll displace a bunch of people and put them in, the UK. So now we triple down on the problem that Europe's having. We're not seeing it like Europe because there was so much pushback. I don't think they would have been able to do what Europe is doing, that, and then you don't have them knocking at your border wall. Now, if we're going to get to a point where we can, I'm trying to word it right, where we can get to a point that we can bring the tensions down. America, Europe, Middle East. I think we can see radical growth really here in America, Europe, but really around the world. As innovations come and things become easier, cheaper, I think that we can see the ability to grow without maybe losing things that we have now. What I really, this bugs me because I like the idea except for where the funding comes from. And that's, urban development. A lot of people like living in the city. I don't get it. I don't think it's a good environment. But if that's your choice, I think that building up rather than out is a better option. What I think is real funny is, I want to live out in the country. And they buy a house in a brand new subdivision right on the outskirts. And they lived there for 10 years ago. Why is it so? It's the city now. We're in the city limits now. I want to move to the country. I moved here to be in the country. So then they move out of the little suburban city limit area and they move to a brand new subdivision. If you want to move to the country, just like when you move to a different country, as in, going from the United States to Mexico, or from Mexico to the United States, you're better off when you're able to appropriate the culture that you're going to be living in. Not expect them to change their ways for you. Well, same when you move from urban to a rural environment. Which a lot of places in America, we just call it moving out in the country. And you move out of the urban to that rural environment, you need to adapt to that rather than just say, I want to move away from this, but then build that exact same thing where you're moving. Thinking that won't just spur more development in your area, and then it's not what you wanted. And I like the idea of the urban development with the downtown type thing. There's a city doing it, but the problem is they'll go after tax money, build a whole bunch of stuff that at the very beginning makes you some money, but after about 10 years, it's now a cost on the taxpayer, while someone that got rich off of it, I'm done. I'm out. Like what? But it needs maintenance. You're what? Then it's up to the taxpayer. We see that with large corporations that just get away with it because, well, they'll bring jobs here. Farm the land. There's a job, and that's something that maybe this summer we can really tackle is the agricultural culture in America that I really think definitely if we start playing with tariffs too much, and farmers are already getting a little upset about that. I believe that we need to change the culture from this corn, wheat, and soybean type farming to more of what we eat. You know, we've lost a lot of our vegetable farming out in California because, well, you know, we got to save a fish that there's no actual proof that it's going extinct, but you know, the population has dropped and we don't know why, so we're just going to stop you from doing it. That whole issue is unbelievable, but I think we need to start getting down to more, you know, not tens of thousands of acres that you're planting soy, corn, and wheat, and that's it. I think we need to get down more to, you know, rural 300 acre, couple hundred acre farming. And that'd also give people that do want to be in the rural area a chance to get out, but not turn it just into suburbia. Because we need to be able to produce for ourselves. And then when we can produce that type of, you know, amounts of food, then we should be able to do it so cheap that we can feed the world more than we already do. Because really, corn, soy, and wheat, is that all we can really, you know, ship out? If we could produce it, could we make food a lot cheaper? Make the ability for people in Mexico to have bountiful foods, maybe change the culture down there, maybe help Mexico out in ways that we might not even know are possible just by, you know, having food so cheap. But we also need to watch because we know how the agricultural industry and the genetics of it play out, which I know there's great broadcasts here on UCY that really dive into that and a lot of the science and things I might not be quite so technical with. But I really do think that it's something that needs to happen. And I think we can solve multiple problems with that. Rural people that believe that they're losing their livelihoods, their culture, and having to sell off to give way to suburbia. I think that the way we can do it takes multiple steps when it comes to the production of seed, you know, chemicals, taxes, property taxes. I think if you're growing food, I think that you really shouldn't be taxed. If you're selling it at market, you shouldn't be taxed. Maybe taxed on, you know, profit that you get, but not taxed on the property that you're growing it I think the more the population may grow would make that really necessary. But there is no surefire answer to any of this, really. There's ideas out there, but a lot of it comes down to a lot of things that can make this easier deal with government getting out of the way. Because when you start looking at it, a lot of it comes down to, well, government gets in the way. They make it hard or prevent or run or dictate how and when and where you do things and how much of your labor you can keep. Because that's what it is. When you trade your labor for the dollar, that's your labor. That's what it comes down to. That's your labor. Now, with everything going on, I think we're at a point right now that there's a lot of things possible. I think right now we have options that we might have not had a couple years ago. But at the same time, there are a lot of things that are being put in place that if the Democrats get in control, could put your freedoms at risk. There's a lot of things that are in play that if people get what they want on the foreign policies that they want, we're going to have to deal with that. And under a Democrat, depending on who it is, who do you think is going to suffer? I believe if a radical Democrat gains power, you're going to see an attack on the white Christian. That's going to be the first attack. But don't worry. You're going to have your trendies that are white atheists they tend to be atheists. Not all of them, but if they're Christian in, label only. They tend not to be practicing Christians, but they're the radical left. And they're going to basically legitimize what they do by being. But once that happens, you could also see their livelihoods put at risk. And really all you have to do is open a history book to find any of this. But I want to thank everybody for staying tuned or tuning in. But stay tuned here on UCY.TV. Great broadcast coming up after this. Again, thank you, and I will catch you Friday.